Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Bob Burke from Natural Products Consulting. I'm joined by my friends Marlo Fogelman of Marlo Marketing, Jeremy Halpern from Nutter, Kevin Mannering from Rodeo CPG, and John Majori from Majori Sales and Marketing. The topic today is, I seem to have a lot of time on my hands lately. Should I take the plunge and pursue my dream of starting a food or beverage brand? I mean, like restaurants, how hard can it be? But before we start, I'd like our panelists to say a few words on their background and their respective firms. Briefly, I have a company called Natural Products Consulting. It's mainly around helping brands bring natural, organic, and specialty products to market. Along the way, I've done a how-to guide, a reference book called the Natural Products Field Manual. My friend John and I have been doing sales seminars twice a year for about 17, 18 years, and I'm privileged to serve on a number of boards and advisory boards. So Marlo, will you introduce yourself?
I will. Thanks, Bob. Hi, everybody. So my company is called Marlo Marketing. We're a full-service integrated marketing and creative agency that specializes in all things hospitality, lifestyle, and CPG. For more than 16 years, we've proven that marketing can be done thoughtfully, strategically, and with an eye towards ROI. And really for us, our mission is to help our clients build their brands by guiding how to best message their story, shape their image, and ultimately drive sales using a mix of earned, owned, and paid initiatives across a variety of mediums to present one integrated vision. And we work with startups to more established brands that you would know and everything in between. Agency CPG clients have included Purdue, Narragansett Beer, Cape Cod Potato Chips, Pretzel Crisps, Willow Tree, Bully Boy Distillers, and many, many more.
Thanks. And Jeremy?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeremy Halpern. I'm a partner and a co-chair of the food and beverage team at Nutter, McLennan and Fish. Nutter is a law firm here in Boston that serves food and beverage clients all over the world, with big concentrations here in the Northeast, in the New York tri-state area, as well as out west. We do have clients, though, outside the country and pretty much in every state in the union. We help those clients with everything from forming entities, capitalizing those companies with angel and venture and debt capital, trademark work, patent work, litigation, employment, pretty much everything that a small, high-growth business is going to need to move into the next phase. So if you have questions during the program or after the program, please feel free to get in touch with us. And my contact information is, I think, in the follow-up email.
Kevin?
Hi, everybody. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. My company, Rodeo CPG, I began with Zach D'Angelo in January of 2019. He's been a friend of mine for a while and had a long operations background and sales background through a bunch of different companies like Little Duck Organics, I and Love and You Pet, Kalat Superfoods, and others. I started in business in Woburn in a warehouse that I think Bob and John both visited 10 years ago when I was a graduate of their sales seminar, but worked at Quinn for a while, went to a sales agency, and joined up with Zach to create this rodeo group who focuses on operations management and sales management. About a third of our clients are actively selling in retail, and we handle either their outsourced operations or back-end sales management functions. And then 2/3 of them are actually pre-launch or DTC only. So a lot of work on finding co-packers, setting up supply chains, and getting businesses off the ground there. So,
Thanks. And John?
Hello, everybody. My name is John Majori. I'm a broker and consultant on the natural food side of the business. I typically broker lines for supermarkets in New England. So I call on Stop and Shop, Shaw's, Market Basket. I do not handle the other side, being like Whole Foods and the co-ops and stuff. My focus on the supermarkets in New England. And then from a consulting side, I work with companies really to ramp up sales, kind of when they made it over the first hurdle or two, and they really want to take their sales to the next level, really doing a sales strategy situation. As Bob mentioned, I do the sales seminar a couple times a year with him. We actually hold it in Boston at the Nutter office when we can actually meet in person. Hopefully in 2021 we'll be able to do that. And then I also sit on some boards as well.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to start with just a few things to think about that we can keep in mind as we listen to our experts. I'll then sort of go around the table and ask them a few basic questions that they can share some things that pretty much everyone should be thinking about. And then we're going to allow some time for Q&A. And as Colleen mentioned in the chat, please submit your questions through the Q&A feature, and we'll be keeping an eye on that, and we'll do our best to address those. So generally, when I talk with folks who are thinking of what you might be contemplating, it's always, you know, what's your ambition with the business? Is this going to be a side hustle, or are you looking to grow and sell to General Mills in the next 3 years at an irrational price? And those kinds of things help inform how you think about growth versus profitability, what kind of capital you need, what kind of a team, what kind of scale to get to either make a living or to have something that's worth something to a buyer. It always starts with, do you have a remarkable product? You know, one that is differentiated in a meaningful way, has a reason to be in the marketplace, tastes great, and has, you know, benefits that consumers are going to value. And then, of course, do you have sufficient gross margin so you can fund trade and consumer programs, have a pathway to positive cash flow, and can have a sustainable, profitable business. And then, you know, one of the things Kevin will touch on is, what's your basic model? Are you going to make it, buy it, outsource, build, and, you know, how will you proceed? So I'm going to go around the room, and we'll start with Jeremy. And Jeremy, when people are starting out on this, when should they think about forming an entity? What does that mean? And what are maybe some of the common structures, you know, LLC, S Corp, et cetera? So maybe we can start with that.
Sure. So I think for folks who have started a business, typically out of their home kitchen, and they're right now running through channels like farmers markets or neighborhood co-op type opportunities, and they're trying to figure out, you know, do I want to take the next step? An entity is not that expensive, and it provides a lot of liability protection for the individual. And so, you know, the first thing is, if you are doing something where somebody could ever get sick, which we're in food, so that's always a possibility, then you definitely ought to have an entity. And so you can always start with, you know, a quick and dirty single member LLC in Massachusetts. It's very low cost. It's very easy to file. You can do it yourself. You don't need a lawyer, but you do need to operate it like an LLC. So if you sign contracts, if you do anything, it has to be in the name of the business, not in your personal name. Like don't file the paperwork, but then do nothing with it. You kind of lose the benefit of it. The second place people should always have an entity is anytime there's more than one founder, because now you're trying to figure out who owns what, and that intellectual property ought to pour into the business, and each person ought to have their respective equity shares, and there ought to be rules of the road about things like vesting. What if somebody quits or is hit, God forbid, hit by a bus or a pandemic? So, you know, those are important things to do early on. The LLC corporation thing is complicated. It has lots of tax implications. The short version of that conversation is you can usually pretty easily go from LLC to corporation, but not the other way around. So if you don't want to talk to a lawyer, you don't really want to think about the complex world of tax, you know, you file an LLC, it doesn't take a lot of documentation, and even if you don't agree on a bunch of things, there's kind of some default principles, and later you can get more formalized. But you should write down that the business owns the IP, and who owns what percentage of that business, and how are you going to make decisions if you have co-founders? Is it one person gets to make the decision, or it requires both of you to make decisions? And in a perfect world, you would actually formalize that into an operating agreement. But the world doesn't stop turning if very early stage entrepreneurs are trying to figure out whether there's a there before they start spending real money and time on legal documentation. Let me pause there.
That was really helpful. Maybe just as a couple of brief follow-ons, when should companies think about trademarking, say, a brand name, company name, and other sort of intellectual property?
Trademark is kind of funny in that it has two main tracks. On the one hand, it rewards people for inventing things in the same way patent does, but trademark is also a real creature of consumer protection. And so the rule is, as soon as you put something that's branded into the stream of commerce, you begin to accrue rights, assuming you are not treading on somebody else's rights. So you don't need to file a federally registered trademark to start to accrue rights in your thing. So Kevin's Donut Shop and Marlo's Bagels can both operate and start to accrue some protection just by operating under those names. But the limit of that is the places in which you are operating. Now, in a post-e-commerce world where you might, even as an early stage brand, be selling into 50 states, you might be engaged in a process of establishing rights in 50 states, but you also may be engaged in a process of infringing other people's rights in 50 states. So I would say before things go too far, it is worth consulting a trademark lawyer, and they're relatively cheap in the scheme of things to file a trademark. The research that goes into it will help you decide whether or not, this is a mark that you can defend in the future. And one of the key things we always tell people is don't spend $15,000 with a marketing firm and package design and making all this beautiful stuff, and then go find out whether you can get the trademark. That should be a collaborative process between the design folks, whether internal or external, and the trademark council of, what is a thing? Do we believe it best represents the brand? And can that mark survive challenge out into the world?
And then just one more. A lot of folks get started maybe with savings, credit cards, help from their parents. But when they're going to raise some money, should they be thinking about convertible notes, safes, borrowing money, debt, or an equity raise?
Yes. So there's famous wisdom in the finance community, which is no business fails for dilution, but lots of businesses fail for running out of money. So capital and cash is king in these businesses. It is the fuel by which you do everything. And so businesses should start thinking about raising money right from the beginning of, what is your thesis about what will this business consume from a cash standpoint? Now, some people manage to create profitable businesses from day one, and they only grow to the extent that they can cash flow themselves. And those tend to take much longer, but other businesses say, nope, we're trying to get to 20 million in sales in 3 years. Well, that's virtually impossible to do absent outside capital. So that leads you to okay, who is that capital going to be and why would they invest in this business kind of thesis? So the mechanism is less critical than the who. Is it going to be angels, angel groups like Branch Ventures, or non-food aligned groups like Launchpad? Is it going to be a VC like Beechwood? Who is going to be the fuel in the fire? And all those different players require different things of a business. They require a different thesis about what the exit looks like. They require a different thesis about how you operate and execute the business and the timelines. So you as an entrepreneur really need to figure out, am I on board with this? Am I on board with potentially getting into a company that's going to be sold in 5 years that I might only own 10% of at the end and that I might not be the CEO of for the last 4 years? Is that an okay thing for me? Or is it, nope, I want to own this thing and operate this thing and I want my grandkids to inherit it? Well, please don't call a VC. You have mismatched the capital source and the outcome. So talk with people in the community. The people on this call all know, how to help you align investor objectives with your objectives and make sure you're talking to the right people. And then structure usually follows a little bit from that, because some of those institutional investors only invest a certain way. So regardless of what you want the world to look like, they're only willing to do certain things. When it comes to friends and family, the goal is keep it simple. Keep it simple. And before you decide to download something off the internet and sign it, that is a moment to call a lawyer, right? Anything that touches the IP or the equity or exclusivity, please call someone, or at least someone experienced in the doing of these things, because it's hard to unwind things that you do incorrectly. It's much more expensive to fix things than it is to do it right the first time.
Excellent. So before we move on to marketing, we have to have something to sell. And so let's go to Kevin. And Kevin, maybe you can speak a little bit on how someone should begin thinking about actually making a product. Should they commercially produce it before they have customers? What are some of the options available? Things like commercial kitchens, co-manufacturers, or making, building their own facility.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think where it all should start is having an idea of who you're going to sell this product to. Are you going to, what are you going to go direct to consumer only first? Are you going to go into retail, and who those customers are? I think there's a lot on the marketing side as well. That I'm sure Marlo will touch on about who that core customer is, but who's actually buying your product and making it available for consumers, especially if you're going to go into retail, and starting with a bottoms-up sales plan that's based around the metrics of units per SKU, per store, per week. Really mapping that growth plan out. I think there's several entrepreneurs, and everyone on this call can help you with the basic templates on all of that, and just understanding the category review cycles if you are going into grocery. And then in terms of direct to consumer, understanding what traffic you're going to get to your site, how much money you have to invest in things like search engine optimization and keyword optimization on Amazon, all of this stuff, and figure out that growth trajectory. Once you have that number, you can start to move into thinking about how you're going to make it, commercially. So as Bob alluded to, commercial kitchens, you're going to be making probably hundreds of cases per week. If you're in there doing it, yourself with some helpers, etc. When you're talking about co-packers, you're probably going to start making runs once a month, every 2 months, every quarter, and making them in the several thousands of cases. So really, it's all about figuring out what you're going to do and what that demand will be, and aligning the plan in that way when you're first getting started.
Great. Now, you guys have generously put together a pretty good list of co-manufacturers and co-packers and have made it available for free. But how does one get started? How do you identify the right one? How do you approach them? What kinds of things should you be prepared to discuss and share with them? What kind of questions might they have of you? And how would you move this along?
Yeah, it's interesting. Once you've decided on a co-packer, a whole new world opens up, and there's really two broad categories that they fall into. One of which is a sort of large co-packer that's doing a bunch of different products that you're basically going to have to be pitching them to allow them to make the product. And then there's other ones who are smaller, maybe more regional, that are looking for nice young brands that are going to chug along. It goes a lot back to what Jeremy was saying about what does this business look like, and again, what is the growth trajectory? Do you want somebody who's really going to get partner with you on a very deep basis, or do you need some massive scalability to meet whatever, if you're going to be planning to grow this to 20 million in 3-4 years, or whatever it is that you've settled on with your investment team. So that push and pull, I think, is really interesting. But in order to understand that, you have to start talking to them. So really, I think our list is a good resource to start to filter things out in terms of what types of capacities these manufacturing facilities have, the types of equipment that it's going to require to make your particular product, how hard it is to make it. And I would really push for folks to work with product development specialists Even if you are a chef or a home chef, we've had situations even with people from going from restaurant to CPG products where it's not the same thing to make a benchtop sample as it is to commercially manufacture it, and understanding all of the different things that you're going to have to take into consideration really whittles down your list significantly, so you can start to have the conversations of partnership that I started with.
And just one more thing on that. Can you talk, at least at a high level, on some of the key sort of terms that you should be prepared to either understand or discuss when you work with a potential co-packer? Because I listen carefully to everything Jeremy Halpern says. I know that above all, you need to own the recipe, and you can't lose control of that through various iterations and reformulations and things from where you begin to where you end. But what are some of the other key things to know?
One of the, if the story of your product is going to be very much around your supply chain, and how you're doing it, say you want to source everything from regenerative farms, for example, a turnkey co-manufacturer is going to be something that you need to look for, because a turnkey co-manufacturer is going to be procuring the raw materials on your behalf. There are other types of co-manufacturers who do not do that, but that is a key term to understand, that if you're very particular about what company you want to buy your products from, or what farm you want to buy your products from, or whatever it is, then that's not going to be something that's in your control if you go into a turnkey co-man. I think the process as well, and this is where people get tripped up from the money standpoint. When you come in, you negotiate everything. There's ballpark pricing, and then there's your final pricing, and in between that is a trial run. Now, if a co-man is one of those really small ones that you're partnering with, there may be some shared costs on the trial run. In other situations, you're basically doing a small production run that you're not going to sell, which could go poorly. So, it could be, this isn't what I wanted. Well, then we're going to have to do another trial run. Obviously, there's negotiations in all of this, but there's a large sort of cash outlay at that point. So ballpark pricing, obviously, should be very familiar to everyone, but really understanding that trial run and that first production run, the difference between them, the time between them, and the fact that there may be multiple ones, I think are things that folks overlook from the beginning.
Great. So before we start posting on social media or doing press releases or spending money on advertising, it should be available and people should be able to find it in stores. So John, how do you know what to charge a store, and how do you think about the price the consumer might pay? And then what kind of stores should you try to get into first?
Well, of course, everyone wants to get into Costco and Walmart and all that. But realistically, you're going to start with small stores. And I always tell people, work with stores within your neighborhood, within your city. Because these are stores that you want to be able to have access to. You want to go in there. You want to understand what's happening with your product. Because you're going to find a lot of different things going to change along the way. So there's no better incubator than being close to home with it. And as far as what you charge, you want to do your homework and find out what the retails and the category is going to be. So you want to have an understanding of what you think your retail price should be there. And then working off that, you got to figure the retail is going to make probably about 40%. So if you want to sell your product for a $4.99 retail, you should think about charging the retail about $3 per unit. And the retail, when you're talking to a retailer, they might be willing to work with you, especially if it's a small retailer in your local town or city. They might say, well, I'm willing to work on a little bit less for you, try to help you out here. Just know that long term, once you get into like a full production run, that Kevin was talking about earlier, you're going to get a better understanding of your cost, and then you'll have a better understanding of what you'll be charging the retailers and distributors. But at the beginning, it's going to be very flexible from that standpoint.
And how do you get the product to the stores? I mean, do you start out by driving it around in your car or van? Do you have to go through a distributor? How does that work?
Typically, that's the way it starts. I can tell you a quick story with Stacy's Pita Chips. When I was a buyer at Stop and Shop, Stacy came into my office and said, "You want to sell these pita chips?" And I gave her 7 stores that we could sell pita chips in. And she said, "Well, how are we going to get them there?" I said, "You're going to deliver them." And you want to be doing that if possible, especially where you can get to meet the people in the store, talk to the store manager, the grocery manager. So you'll get them on the side and help. They're going to help you understand what you need for your product. And they'll tell you what people are saying about it because they're there 40, 50, 60 hours a week. You might be able to go in there, do some demos and stuff, but you're going to be there a short period of time. But these are the people that are going to see your product every day.
And it sounds like delivering product in your car can get old pretty fast. How many stores do you need before a distributor will pick you up?
Yeah, so, everyone thinks that's efficient. I can do it myself. But if you're looking big picture, you want to grow to hundreds of stores, thousands of stores, you're not going to be able to do it yourself. There's even the big CPG companies are getting away from self-distribution. It's that difficult out there. So what you want to is to try to find small distributors. Now, typically you need about 20, 30, 40 stores before a distributor will really seriously start looking at bringing your product in. But also when a distributor looks at that, it's a little bit of what what you can give them for existing business, but also what they see potential is in your business. So they want to look at the packaging, what's the taste, the quality, all the different things that line up with it. So it's not just like, oh, I've got these 20 stores. And remember, you might have 20 or 25 stores, but they might only deliver to 10 or 15 of them. And most 99.99% of distributors are not going to distribute a product to one of the stores you want them to just for your item. So they've got to be going there with multiple items. So understand that when you're talking to distributors, they'll tell you what stores are key stores for them.
Great. Thanks, John. So now you have a great idea. You've made the product. You're getting into some stores. Marlo, how do you tell the world that such a product like this exists?
Well, first off, Bob, I'm glad that you put marketing last because everything Jeremy, Kevin, and John spoke about should come first. But the stuff that I do is seen as like the fun stuff. So oftentimes people will jump ahead and it's a complete waste of time and resources. So, I think the best way to market a new product totally depends on the product and how much money you have to spend. And whether or not you're in the middle of a global pandemic, that can affect it as well. Seriously, it could be social, it could be sampling, it could be paid grocery, it could be influencers, could be digital, could be PR, could be Amazon. Ultimately, it really depends on your target audience, your timing and path to purchase. Driving in store, of course, back when that was a thing, which it will be again, hopefully at some point in our future, is going to require totally different tactics than driving to online purchase. So, sampling, obviously right now not an option. So regardless of what your tactic is, the thing to keep in mind is how to create an authentic story about your brand and convey the value that your brand is going to provide to your target audience. And it goes, I think, without saying that everything you do needs to be in that voice as well. Start with what your brand position is, and from there you can build the right marketing plan.
And, when it comes to marketing, there's loads of ways to invest money, right? And it could be in package design, it could be in social media, influencers, digital, it could be conventional advertising. How should entrepreneurs, especially early stage companies, think about, where to start and how to prioritize and where to go first?
Yeah, I would definitely, you hit it. I would definitely say branding and packaging should be your first expense. However, as Jeremy said, once your legal is squared away, we've been in that situation with clients before who swore their legal was done and we made extra money because we had to go and redo everything. But how you present yourself to the world, especially in sort of these times, not COVID, but just modern days, means almost more than anything. Not only to get on the shelf, to stand out on the shelf, and to stand out on Instagram, really, social media. So investing in quality packaging that communicates your value proposition clearly and concisely is where I would spend my money as my first marketing expense. Of course, this is also assuming that you have a killer product, you have your supply chain in place, all those other elements. But really the packaging. And then again, once you've got the packaging and brand identity squared away, then from there, you can ensure that all of your consumer touch points are consistent, high quality, and continue to tell that brand story in the right way. Because once that marketing spigot is on, you want to make sure that wherever customers look for you, what they find delivers on that brand promise.
And roughly how long does it take to start to see some results?
Yeah, you know, marketing success is rarely overnight, you know, despite there's some viral sensations that sort of seem to pop up and, you know, are just everywhere. Very few, that's few and far between, you know, so it's really being thoughtful about marketing. And again, because it's a thing that everybody thinks they're an expert in, there's often, you know, not really that thought and strategy put into the plan. So, you know, an impatient brand might go down the path of, for example, maybe buying followers on social media because they think that having their numbers higher makes them look better, or spending a ton of money on paid advertising upfront. But at the end of the day, if you don't thoughtfully build an audience and a customer base that believes in your products, all of those upfront eyeballs, impressions, whatever, are fleeting. So we really recommend focusing on marketing tactics that are deeper than they're wide. Do fewer things well, and then build up a real base that your brand can deliver for. And then also, you need to set realistic goals based on what you have to work with, whether it's spend-wise, resource-wise. You know, you're not going to get A-level celebs on a D-level budget. We had a client, a national huge brand, that was like, we want Matt Damon, we want Ben Affleck. We're like, oh, great, your budget is multi-million. They're like, oh, no, we have like $500,000 to spend. Okay, well, you're not going to get it, you know? So you can't expect tons of influencer endorsements if you don't have budget to sample product, you know? So really, it's about finding a marketing partner who can help guide you with what makes sense for whatever stage you're at in the business cycle, and then be patient. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Got it. So I'm going to go around one more time with some follow-on questions, and then we'll open it up to our audience. So back to you, Jeremy. Sometimes people ask, you know, can you get a patent on your recipe? Is that something that can be protected? Whether it's your grandma's or whether it's something you've concocted yourself, is that something that can be protected?
I'm sure there's going to be at least one person listening to this call who's going to throw things down and storm away from this Zoom call. But the short answer for most people on the call is no. If an easy test is if you have done less than 6 months of hard biotech level chemistry, no. On the other hand, if you are somebody who is in fact inventing, you know, the next beyond meat, if you are doing something in cellular culture, or if you're doing something in particularly replacement protein technology, then maybe the answer is yes. But for most folks who are just thinking about a better version of the cracker, the cookie, the drink, the whatever, the short answer is no. And you can waste an awful lot of time and money and headache trying to chase down something that is very unlikely to produce any commercial value for you whatsoever.
And, you know, Kevin had mentioned, you know, perhaps getting outside help around formulation and all of that. Is there any risk with that, or any things people should think about when they're getting outside help to formulate, or going from, say, benchtop to production runs?
So first, I 100% agree with Kevin that very few entrepreneurs who have not been in the chemistry side or the food production side know the difference between pilot level production and scale production and what it's going to do to your beloved recipe. In fact, I have an entrepreneur I've worked with now in multiple companies who said he never ate the product that he produced after he formulated it, because it was never as good as when they actually formulated it, right, once it went through the production process. And he was always frustrated by that. So you should absolutely work with someone who understands scale level production. Whether that's on the team or an outsourced agency, or even the co-packer itself will often provide those kinds of resources. What's important is that all of the people involved in that process delineate what's the brand's IP and what is that third-party IP. So an example would be if you go to a cookie manufacturer and say, can you produce me another chocolate chip cookie, but I want to do it with 2 times the butter, the cookie manufacturer is not going to say, everything I know about cookie making is now your intellectual property brand, right? That's not a realistic thing to expect. So they have their background knowledge, manufacturing expertise, whatever. What you should expect is your formulation, your recipe that has that double butter is your IP, and they're not going to go tell anybody else or share that intellectual property with someone else. But someone else is free to do the exact same thing. You can't forestall a competitor from doubling up the butter in their recipe, but you can make all the people who work with you, you can enforce the idea that they can't share that information. And sometimes that trade secret information is the most valuable thing. And the famous case is the recipe to Coca-Cola was considered the most valuable trade secret there was, right? And people could always tell when you were at some diner and you ordered Coke and they didn't kind of say, we don't serve Coke, right? But it didn't taste right. That was because you were getting no-name generic cola where they couldn't replicate it exactly right. So I would work with somebody who's a professional. I would make sure there's clear rules of the road about intellectual property. And the question of who's going to contribute the cost of that process varies from situation to situation. Some co-packers will throw in the R&D expertise to get your business. Others are going to charge you hourly or by the project. Third-party formulators are definitely going to charge you hourly or by the project. Kevin, I don't know if you've seen things leaning one direction, hourly versus project-based. I seem to see more project dollars than hourly, but so it's an important thing for everybody to be in agreement about what that's going to look like.
And then just one last thing for now. Kevin referred to some of the terms that you might expect with a co-manufacturer, but can you go a little further on what to expect in a co-packer contract, and what are some of the real highlights in terms of either risk areas or things to really tune in on as an entrepreneur?
Sure. And long-form co-pack deals for brands, even at the $1 million run rate, those contracts can run 30 to 40 pages, no joke. And that's before you include the specifications. There's a lot to be managed and to be thought about in those deals. I would say if you thought about the architecture, they fall into some big buckets. So Kevin mentioned one of the first big, decision trees, which is, are they turnkey? Are they doing your sourcing as well as your conversion into a finished good? Or are you drop shipping everything to them and then they're just converting it? They're applying the labor and the process to it. That has some big implications for the quality control, because typically if they're only converting it and anything goes wrong, the very first thing a co-packer says is, it was you and your ingredients, it wasn't me. And so that will often make a difference also if there's a kill step in the process. If there is, life gets a little easier, but if there is not, there becomes a fight about that. The second is, what is the architecture of the financial arrangement? So are they saying, here's a price per unit? I am a huge fan of that for early stage brands, even though Kevin and all the CPG consulting folks are going to tell you that's a terrible idea. You can't get any savings that way. But for small brands, the alternative is they're charging you either cost or cost plus for all of the ingredients, and they're charging you the service and profit piece of the equation. And the problem with that is you are often one human and you are doing all of these functional areas at the same time. And you do not have 600 hours in your year to go play reconciliation with, did you use the right amount of rice? And did you use the right amount of flour? And did I overpay? All in an effort to recover $50,000. Like, your time is more valuable than that at this stage. So while at a later stage business, I would agree, you want to control the ingredient costing. From a simplicity standpoint, there is tremendous value for an early business who can get a co-packer to say, it's $2 a unit. Now you know your cost. Now you can go talk to John and figure out, do I have enough profit margin for what I'm going to need to sell to that distributor who's going to sell it to that retailer? Do these economics work, or do they not? And now they're predictable, which is a great thing for you as an early brand. And with that, I'm going to let Kevin rebut this and tell me I'm an idiot.
No, I sufficient time in this session, but go ahead.
I was going to say, I do agree that simplicity is sometimes very key, because you need to get the product out there. You need to get customers. You need to, especially if you're using co-packers, you need to move product, and you can optimize your supply chain. You can optimize everything over time, but you can't optimize nothing. So
Kevin, Rodeo, among other things, does services as an outsourced operations firm. Can you share a little bit about what does that mean? So you've got an entrepreneur, you got a couple of founders, they've got this idea, they've gone through this process. How much of that is reasonable for them to do themselves? Where might they benefit by employing a firm like yours?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's always, especially in the situation you described, a single entrepreneur or a couple of entrepreneurs, everyone sort of tends to have what they're either operationally minded, sales minded, marketing minded, whatever it is that brought them to this sort of decision to start a company together. So there is different levels of involvement from different entrepreneurs or different members of the sort of founding team in all of this as a caveat. But groups like ours really work as, either in place of or in support of the operational team, depending on the scale of the business. So it's perfectly reasonable to find an outsourced team to help you source a co-packer. What you need to bring to that is things like brand integrity pieces. What you want this to look like, what ingredients you will not, where your lines are. If you're clear about that, you have a formula that's scalable, or you're also working with a product formulation person, then it's very, unless it's totally out there, it's very easy to get these things set up, and your timeline should really be somewhere in the 6 to 10 week standpoint of getting to a trial run with a co-packer from I need somebody to make this.
Great. Now, John, what's the role of a broker in all of this? What does a broker do? What do they charge? How do they fit into this whole mix?
So you typically, I'm not going to use a broker right away, but once you start getting a little bit of traction, maybe getting to the first distributor, there is people out there called food brokers. And sometimes people don't understand exactly what they do. One of the quick things I always tell people is a food broker is like a real estate broker. They're not going to take possession of your product. You're just going to pay them a commission. In some cases, you're going to pay them a retainer. But they're going to go out and help get you stores for your product. So they've got contacts. They know the best stores for your product. They know who to talk to about that. So they're going to be the ones to be able to help you put your product into more stores. But to think you're coming right out of the box and you haven't sold anybody yet and you want to get it into 25 stores, you're not really going to be able to just find a broker that's going to go get the first 25 stores for you. So definitely be prepared to do the first step yourself. It's kind of that next level where the brokers will really start to come into play.
And can you just say a few more words on what would someone pay a broker?
Yeah. So typically, when a broker at the very beginning is going to look for what's called a retainer. So they're going to get a certain amount every month, no matter how much they sell, because there's going to be a lot of effort there before they even sell a case. Going to the store 1 or 2 times, getting the paperwork done and things like that. So, a small retainer might be, $750, depending, different brokers with bigger regions might charge you a couple $1,000. But then long term, the commission rate typically for brokers is going to be 5%. And that's what you would pay a broker.
Thanks. And Marlo, there's a lot of marketing services agencies out there. A firm like yours does a wide variety of things, from, branding strategy to package design to marketing communications. How should founders think about what's the right type of agency? What kinds of things might they need first? Maybe a range of what to expect to spend for these kinds of services so they can plan accordingly.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the most important thing is really, before you even go down the road of hiring marketing or operations or brokers, is to find mentors, right, that you can really trust to help guide you, because to think that you're going to understand it all, you're not. So the way that we work in two ways. People can either hire, actually three ways. People can either hire us on the creative side for a project. I need a brand, I need packaging, I need a website, and that's sort of one and done. And then other clients will hire us for ongoing retainer-based work, and that might be public relations, marketing strategy, social media, influencer relations, etc. And then other clients will hire us, similar to Kevin and Rodeo, as sort of an outsourced solution. So instead of having to bring on in that marketing team, we're just sort of outsourced. Because what happens is, I've talked to so many people, oh, I'm hiring a director of marketing. Oh, really? What are you paying them? It's $50,000. Okay, you're not getting a CMO at $50,000, right? So for smaller brands, you can't really afford to have the high level strategy that you need at the beginning to sort of put your plan in place, and then the hands on the ground to actually execute. And so for some clients, they'll hire us just to sort of be that outsourced, and they just outsource all of the marketing to us. So, as far as what you need, like I said, it's find people that you trust, talk to references, look at the work that they've done. They're, like I said earlier, unfortunately with marketing, everybody you can do social, right? You can sort of be on Instagram, but are you doing it well? So there's a sense that everybody fancies himself a marketing genius. You wouldn't say, well, I'm going to write my contract. I can do that better than Jeremy. No, you really probably can't. And it's the same thing with trusted marketing experts. So I would just say, do your research, talk to people, and really do your due diligence in that space.
So Kevin, here's the easiest question of all today. A few people have asked, where can they find that list of co-manufacturers?
Rodeo, just go to rodeocpg.com. There's a section there called Knowledge Share. It's listed in a blog post about finding a co-packer with some other helpful hints and tips. Thanks.
And what I'm going to do is start going through some of the questions that have come in. We still have a good number of people on the call. I would encourage you to put questions in the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to cover as many of these as we can before we wrap up. So Marlo, one of the questions that came in is, what kind of marketing metrics should people be looking at to understand, things like market penetration or effectiveness of different, say, marketing initiatives and campaigns?
I mean, I think it depends on what you're doing and at what stage of the sort of life cycle of the brand, right? At the beginning, if you're trying to get enough stores so then you can go and engage with a broker or, use a co-packer, then your metrics going to be very different than if you're, 5 years in and, making $20 million. But, and the thing with marketing, there are certainly, I mean, especially when you go down the digital route, direct to consumer sales, Amazon sales, ROI is very easy to connect. And there's other things where it's not, building a brand, there is absolutely ROI in building a brand. You are not always going to be able to connect this dot to this dot and say, because of this, we got here. But if you don't do that, you're probably going to have difficulties in other parts. So, I think with marketing, I think it's looking at it in two different ways. Where can you be, very tangibly tied to ROI, and where does it have to be, a little bit softer, and recognizing that ultimately is going to result in the ROI you're looking for.
Great. One of the questions that came up earlier in the chat function was explaining a little bit about gross margin and what to shoot for. Jeremy put down some really good information, and I'm just going to spend a minute elaborating a little bit on that. And so the first thing I want people to understand is how to define gross margin. And if you think of an income statement or a P&L, you have a section called gross to net sales. So your top line, gross sales, less returns, discounts, allowances would be your net sales. Net sales minus your cost of goods would be your gross profit. And gross profit divided into net sales is what investors, strategics, banks, and others refer to gross profit. or gross margin, not your product margin, which might be your list price that no one actually pays, minus your cost of goods. So that might be a little inflated. But you need to start with a healthy product margin to end up with a viable gross margin on your P&L. And a few things to consider and to think about. One is your sales mix. So if you're making a line of beverages or cookies, as Jeremy mentioned, and others, you might have different cost of goods for each item, depending on whether they have nuts or chocolate chips or what have you. And so depending on that sales mix will inform sort of your weighted average cost of goods or your blended average. So keep that in mind. And then on the other side of the equation will be your, what is your weighted average price based on your channel mix. So if you think about it, your lowest price is going to be your sales through distributors. Your next highest price might be a direct sale to a retailer. And then your highest price of all might be whatever direct-to-consumer business you might be doing. So if a company is doing, say, 70% of their volume through a distributor, 20% direct to retail, 10% direct to consumer, whether it's off your website or farmers markets, what have you, that mix will inform what that average price is. And obviously, the more it shifts upwards, the higher gross margin you'll have. Jeremy.
As it relates to financing activity as opposed to operating cash, there is an institutional bias, however, that favors sales via retail. And that bias may be changing, particularly in the light of the last 6 months. But investors will often say, I'm much more comfortable understanding what $1 million of wholesale dollars means when it's via distribution and into a general grocery or into Whole Foods or whoever it might be, versus that same $1 million, even though it's higher margin, direct to consumer. Investors trust that revenue less. They don't understand its predictability in the same way. And they will not give you the same credit for it when they think about valuing your company. So it's completely antithetical to logic that the $1 million that produces 70% gross margins is valued less than the $1 million that produces 35% gross margins. But that's the reality, because one, they treat it as a validation of the marketplace, and the other, they don't know how to treat it. They don't trust it.
Yeah. And I think I'll add that gross margins are going to vary somewhat based on the category you're in, right? So if you're making frozen foods, gross margins tend to be a little lower just because of the added costs and a little bit of a ceiling of what consumers are going to pay. And at the other end are things like nutritional supplements, where there's very little relationship between the actual cost of making it and the value conferred to consumers. And so it might be common for nutritional supplements to have 60 or 70 or 80% gross margins, whereas a frozen product might be in the low 30s or mid 30s at best. So one of the questions that came in, and I'll paraphrase, is, is traditional bricks and mortar distribution still viable, especially say during COVID? The costs of getting product on the shelf of it, say a Whole Foods or even an independent, can be quite high. You have distributor margin, you have upwards of 40% margin for the retailer, you've got brokers involved, you've got trade spending, which might be promotional allowances and sampling and free fills and all these kinds of things. Is that still viable, or should people be thinking mostly about e-com? And I'll just open it up, whoever wishes to answer that.
Bob, I'll jump in first. Because I deal mostly with the bricks and mortar. And, back in March when COVID hit, everybody started buying online and everyone was talking about being the death of the grocery store. But really right now, most grocery stores are up double digits versus last year. So people have made their way back to the store because people are comfortable buying. And Jerry mentioned it earlier about, investors look at that volume as very consistent versus the e-commerce. E-commerce tends to come and go with different brands. What's hot now might not be hot in a month from now. So brick and mortar is going to be very vital to building it. And even within bricks and mortar, from a supermarket standpoint, from Jeremy's evaluation, versus TJ Maxx or Costco or, Trader Joe's. One of the core things about the supermarkets, even the drugstores, if you're in pharmaceuticals and stuff, is having it on the shelf so the customers consistently can buy your product. Because that's one of the major things is about having your product available consistently to the customers.
Excellent. And Kevin.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add to that is McKinsey put out a good piece about the percentage of sales that are coming through grocery retailers but are actually digitally native sales, things like through Instacart or Amazon Fresh and that sort of thing. So, and this, maybe Marlo has seen some of this as well from a brand standpoint, but the traditional trade spend routes, the traditional, maybe display of product doesn't really attract as much consumers if there's a ton of shoppers coming in with a preordained list because they're shopping for somebody else. It's still a vast majority of these purchases are in-person purchases by the customer themselves, but the rate at which that has grown is pretty striking, from Whole Foods, Amazon, all the way through Walmart.
Great. So we have a question probably for Kevin, maybe for Jeremy. Is it appropriate to have the co-packers take part in some of the cost of a trial run? Even if you own the formula, is that something they might say subsidize to get your business, or should you just expect to be paying sort of list price?
For the trial run itself, I think by the book, you're paying for it. I was alluding to some things earlier when if you can get yourself into some conversations with smaller co-packers where there are sort of incentives, cost sharing, and then equity incentives, things like that as well. So everything is a negotiation, but if we're looking for what to put in the textbook, you're paying for the trial run.
So I'm going to, we have a few minutes left, and I was just going to go around the room briefly, and I'll ask our panelists to think, if you were giving advice to a friend, a kid brother or sister, nephew or niece, about one or two things to really think about before you embark on this kind of journey, what would that advice be? And so, because I didn't prep you on it, whoever wants to go first can go first.
I'll go. I think the number one thing I would say is, are you creating a product? Are you bringing a product to market that the market really needs? Right? Your grandmother's biscotti or granola might be amazing and everybody loves it and everybody wants to buy it and it's your Christmas gift and all of those things. But does the market need another granola? I don't know. What are you going to do to it that's going to make the market need that? You don't have to necessarily be first to market. There's certainly room for new chocolate chip cookies, but you can't just come out with another, Tates or something like. You just have to be better. You have to be different. So I would think my biggest advice would be, what are you bringing to the market and how is it really going to stand apart from what's already available?
Great. Who wants to go next? Yes, Jeremy.
Sure, I'll go. First, I would just echo Marlo. Anything the rest of us say is going to be secondary to that, which is right. Pull beats push every time. From my standpoint, the thing I see that costs the most heartache is people not having a war chest. And so whether that's taking a line out on your house, whether that's, just having savings or an early friends and family investor, but living in a brand hand to mouth where you're always struggling to do the next program, the next project, or you can't run the co-packer and run the trade promotion at the same time, that becomes incredibly limiting. And it doesn't mean that you have to find $3 million laying around not doing anything, but you have to really plan out what is this going to take to spend, and do we have enough to really do it? Because you're going to spend half your life fundraising for this business. It's very painful. You will always get a better deal when you've got traction. So it's a very chicken and egg problem. If you've got a little bit of a war chest early on, you can have more traction than other people at same stage who didn't have a war chest, and thereby attract more capital and on better terms to get to the next layer, and on and on. So as opposed to running out of money and then running around like a crazy person, you know, looking for anybody who will drop 100 grand so that, you know, Kevin can help you pull the trigger on the next co-pack run, but until then you're going to be out of stock. Like, that's a miserable place to be. So war chest is cash is king.
Great. Kevin?
Yeah, I think that the most interesting or the most interesting advice you could give to somebody on this is to remember that they brought this sort of idea to life when they're in the middle of it, and not to be so concerned about a buyer that didn't bring the product on, or what your competitors are doing or racing. I mean, the sort of graveyard of brands is filled with Me Too items, as Marlo alluded to. So if you're so concerned with what's the trend I got to catch up with, what is, oh, these guys are copying me or whatever, block that noise out and trust yourself. If you've taken this leap, you've got the war chest. I mean, there comes a time for sure for in-depth data analysis and, you know, measuring price elasticity and all of that sort of stuff. But when you're getting when you're getting started and you're developing new items, just continue to trust the brain that brought that item into being, without worrying what others have to say.
Nice. And John?
So just building off one of the early things, understand most stores, if they're going to put your product on the shelf, something's coming off the shelf. So you're going to think about, if they're going to take an item off to put yours on, yours better sell more than what they're taking off. Not even as much. It's got to be more, because they're going to do all this work to get your product into the store. And the other thing I'll always add is that, your friends and family love your pasta sauce or love your salad dressing or whatever, and you're always going to hear that. I always say, I don't care what 10 of your friends and family have to say, give it to 10 of your enemies and tell me what they think of your product, because that's going to be the true test, because those are the people that are going to be buying your product long term.
And what if you don't have 10 enemies, John?
Ask me, I got plenty I can give you.
Yeah. And I think I'll just wrap up. In my role, I tend to be sometimes in the middle with brands, clients, with brokers, with agencies, with investors, other service providers. And one of the biggest reasons why things go wrong is a mismatch in expectations. So if you can be clear about direction, results you're looking for, objectives, and then hear agreement from the other side that yes, they can get that done, and then you have a process for holding them accountable for results, deadlines, quantifiable objectives, proverbial SMART goals, etc., then things generally work out better. So I think we're at the end of our time, a few minutes over. Thanks to our panel. I think this has been great. Thanks for everybody for listening in. I understand the recording will be available later for those who have registered. Is that correct, Jeremy?
I think that's right, and we'll email something back out to everyone who registered so that they have access to resources. So if you want anything else, or you want to reply back and say, can I get a list of X or whatever it is of something you heard, please let us know, and we'll try and circle back with the registration group to get back to you as soon as we can.
All right. Well, thanks again, and so long. Bye-bye.